Welcome to the channel. I don't know that I'll ever be big enough to say welcome back to the channel, but welcome nonetheless. The shrimp you saw a second ago were one of the first party food dishes that I learned from Food Wishes years ago. These shrimp are delicious. They're garlicky and herby with just a little bit of heat from the pepper and the cayenne, plus the breadcrumbs give it a bit of crunch and texture. What I'm using here are U15 shrimp, which just means that there are under 15 shrimp per pound. These shrimp are pretty large, but I knew that there was going to be about 40 to 50 people, and you can't just give someone a single shrimp. I figured 2 to 3 shrimp per person, so I ended up going for 8 pounds or about 120 pieces of shrimp. Like most seafood, these shrimp come frozen, so I defrosted them in the fridge for a couple of days. I rinsed them briefly to get rid of all the purge and melted ice. I don't know if you could see it in the video, but there was a lot of liquid in the bag with the shrimp, and I just wanted to get rid of it. And then after that, I got a little station set up at the kitchen table to start shelling. The one downside to this recipe is that the sheer number of shrimp takes a bit of time to work through. Even though these are easy peel shrimp, taking 10 seconds a shrimp means 20 minutes to get through 8 pounds. Basically, all I want to do is leave the tail and the last ring of shell attached. That sort of forms the handle that people can use to hold the shrimp and grab the shrimp while they're eating it. I do save all the shells. Basically, I put all the remaining shells into a bag and then I throw them into the freezer so that I can forget about them over the following months. I hate throwing away things like this since I know they can be used for something, but I'm also just too lazy to do that thing sometimes. These eventually need to be butterflied, but there'll be a better time to do that later, so I hold off on that for now. Now it's time for the coating. For the dry ingredients, I'm using dried thyme, dried oregano, fresh pepper, salt, and later on I will add in some cayenne pepper. I mix these together briefly just to see what the ratios look like, and I can already tell that I'm going to need to add more salt to this, which is actually going to be a pretty common theme today. I shouldn't have been surprised. I think I underestimated how much salt I would need, but I do have 8 pounds of shrimp here, so it's going to need a ton of salt. Once I'm happy with the herbs, I go ahead and add in the panko breadcrumbs. Now for the star ingredient, the garlic. Given the amount of shrimp that we had, I ended up using almost the entire head of garlic here. To help get the skins off, I used the shake method. Basically, I crushed the garlic and put them all into a bowl. I stacked another bowl on top of it, and then I just shook the whole thing until the skins fell off, and it worked for most of the pieces. Because of the amount of garlic that I was going to be using here, to give myself a little bit of a head start on crushing them, I used a garlic press to get partway there. That just makes it easier to mash everything in the mortar and pestle, because I thought it would take a long time for the amount of garlic that I had here. I add a little bit of olive oil to stop the garlic from reacting with the air, and then I add a little bit of salt as an abrasive, and then I start mashing everything together. Since we already put the garlic through the press, it only takes a couple of minutes for the whole thing to become a loose paste. I add that to the breadcrumbs and then start grinding up some Italian or flat leaf parsley. This one unfortunately takes a lot longer to mash up, but I'm eventually able to crush this down until it's significantly smaller and becomes sort of like a chunky paste. I add this to the bowl along with a whole bunch of freshly chopped parsley and a cup of olive oil to get us started here. The amount of olive oil that I need is going to vary a little bit depending on the rest of the ingredients, so I used a cup here, but I ended up adding an extra half cup later on. I started mixing everything together, and then I realized very quickly that I forgot to add in some Parmesan and the cayenne pepper. It might look like that I'm grating in a lot of Parmesan here, but once I push it off to the side, you can see that there's actually not very much for the sheer volume of stuff that I have here. And similarly with the cayenne pepper, I'm adding just enough to give it a little bit of a kick, but not enough to make it spicy. And basically, I'm just trying to, with both these ingredients, I'm just trying to add some extra layers of flavor to the shrimp. So one tricky thing with this recipe, or like any breading recipe, is that it's a little bit tricky to see if the coating is in a good spot. And so in order to test this, I go ahead and butterfly a couple of pieces of shrimp, and I dredge them through the breading. What you can see here is I'm just burying the shrimp into the breading, pressing down so that they stick, and then pulling the shrimp out. And this is about as much breading as it's going to get. It's not going to be like some deeply fried breaded shrimp or something. This is really just going to be crispy breadcrumbs that are coating it. These go into a 475-degree oven, and while I am baking those test pieces, I go ahead and start butterflying the rest of these shrimp. In order to butterfly these things, what I should be doing is butterflying them on the bottom side where the legs of the shrimp are, so like the inside of the C. But because these are easy peel shrimp, they are already scored along the back where the shell was broken and where the poop chute was removed for me. And so rather than butterflying them on the bottom, I'm just taking a knife and I'm deepening the cut that's on the top. And I'm basically achieving the same effect here. I'm trying to go deep enough that I can split the shrimp, but not separate the two halves. So there's a little bit of skin that's holding the two things together. And that little bit of skin actually creates like a pocket to hold more breadcrumbs. So it's kind of important that those things kind of stay there. These test shrimp are now done. I give them a minute to cool off a bit, and then I taste test, and almost immediately I could tell that they needed more seasoning. Basically everything was just too muted. So I doubled all my herbs, and then I added a healthy bit more salt and pepper. And I gave these things another mix, and then I tested a couple more shrimp just to see where things were at. The second batch came out better, though I was still a little bit worried they needed more salt. Salt's always a little bit tricky for me to tell with these things. I don't know if I'm just becoming salt immune or something, but usually I have my dad taste test, but he wasn't here today. So in order to test this, I poured some salt onto a plate, and then I tried just dipping the shrimp into the salt to see what it was like, and I was like, oh yeah, this made it a lot better. And so with that, I quickly added a healthy pinch of salt to the breadcrumbs one final time, and then I mixed the whole thing together. Now for the breading. Unfortunately, I lost the footage for this, or not really lost it, but I wasn't in frame for this because I was trying to keep my eye on the bowls. But I basically dumped all the shrimp into the breadcrumbs, and then I just mixed the whole thing up. It was a little bit hairy because this was my largest bowl, and so there just wasn't quite enough space. What I really should have done was I should have split this into two batches, but oh well, it ended up working out in the end. And then for me, this is actually where I paused here. So what you could do is you could lay these all out on baking sheets, and that's what I would normally do if I was having the party at my house. But we were going to one of my coworkers' houses, and so I needed to bring all these shrimp over there. And so what I did instead was I just left them on all inside this bowl. I covered this bowl up, and then I put it in the fridge. And I took the bowl with me along with some baking sheets and foil to the party here. And unfortunately, once we got to the party, I also just didn't feel comfortable recording everything, so I had to kind of work quickly while the people that are around. So I don't have a shot of me laying the shrimp out, but this is what the shrimp are like when they're all laid out on trays. And I was just constantly cycling these trays through the oven. They take about 10 minutes at 475. And what you see here, to present these, I basically warmed a Dutch oven. And then I started storing these inside the Dutch oven because I didn't want to, like the trays of shrimp would just take up too much space. So I needed to stack them. But I didn't want them to get soggy while they were sitting there. And so by heating the Dutch oven, I was trying to basically create a situation where the moisture would not stay trapped inside the pot. And I just started layering the shrimp one by one. And by the end of it, I had this mountain of shrimp in there. And then I basically took all the breadcrumbs from all the foil trays that were left over and dumped them all onto the top of the shrimp, along with some fresh parsley. With that, this is a wrap. These shrimp are always a hit, and this year was no exception. I put a link to Chef John's video down below. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again next time.